You'll never be anything. No one will ever take you seriously. That's what they said. Laughed. Right at dinner. Over pot roast and red wine, with smug faces and raised eyebrows like I was the family joke. The next day, my father's boss walked into that same house. He looked me dead in the eye, saluted, and said, "Good morning, Senator." Their forks dropped. My name is Claire Mitchell, and from wherever you're watching this, stay with me. Have you ever had the people closest to you look right through you, like you were invisible in your own home? That night, I felt it more than ever. It was my father's 65th birthday, some grand retirement dinner at our family estate. White linens, crystal glasses, and 25 people who hadn't called me in years suddenly pretending we were so proud of Claire. But it didn't last. My brother Paul raised a glass. To the real achievers in the family, he said. People who chose real jobs, not campaigns and Twitter arguments. Laughter followed. Even Dad chuckled. Then he added, "Sweetheart, politics isn't real work. No one takes it seriously until you're, well, someone real." Another sip of wine. Another stab to the heart. I sat there, 34, single, exhausted from 3 years of endless campaigning, building grassroots movements from scratch, going door to door in the rain just to get people to believe in something again. But at that table, I was still just Claire who writes speeches and thinks she's important. Mom leaned over at dessert and whispered, "Why don't you go back to consulting? You made good money there. These public service games, they're not who we are." I didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't raise my voice. I just smiled and stood up, tapped my glass, and said, "Thank you all for reminding me exactly why I do what I do." They blinked. Some smirked. Paul muttered, "Here we go." I left before the cake was cut, because I knew something they didn't. That in the morning, my name was going to be on every newspaper in the state. That the governor himself had called me an hour before dinner. And that soon, they'd all be eating their words with a side of regret. I didn't sleep that night. Not because I was nervous, but because I could feel it. The shift. The turning. The moment the world changes, not with a scream, but a whisper in the dark that says, "It's time." By 6 a.m., my phone was already vibrating off the nightstand. Missed calls, texts, emails. CNN had picked it up. So had the Times. Claire Mitchell wins historic Senate seat in upset victory. Historic. The first independent woman in my state's history to ever claim that chair. And I had done it without a political dynasty, without corporate backers, without a famous last name. I did it with volunteers who knocked on 75,000 doors. With nurses and veterans and teachers by my side. With truth. And grit. At 7:10 a.m., I stepped into my childhood home. Not to gloat, but because I'd promised my father's boss, Mr. Langston, a courtesy visit before the press conference. He liked formality. And he'd always been kind to me, even when Dad rolled his eyes behind my back. When I walked into the dining room, they were still finishing breakfast. Mom, Dad, Paul, his wife Tracy, same polished expressions, same low hum of judgment. Then Mr. Langston walked in behind me. He didn't greet Dad first. Didn't even look at Paul. He went straight to me, extended his hand. "Good morning, Senator Mitchell." Then he saluted. Military style. Sharp, respectful, loud enough for everyone to hear. Forks clinked against china. Mom dropped her coffee spoon. Dad's face went pale. Paul looked like he swallowed his tongue. Langston turned to them. "I assume you've prepared the congratulations," he said, smiling but tight-lipped. They hadn't. Of course they hadn't. And suddenly all the things they used to mock. The late nights, the town halls, the bus rides, the protests, they mattered. Because someone with power had acknowledged me. And in that house, that was the only language they'd ever respected. But I didn't need their applause. What I had planned next was far more satisfying. Paul chased me out to the porch 15 minutes later, his voice sticky with fake sweetness. "Claire, hey, wait up. That was unexpected. Congratulations, I guess." "Senator? That's big." He sounded like a used car salesman, the kind who called women sweetheart right before lowballing them. I didn't stop walking. just said, "Thanks," over my shoulder. He jogged beside me, trying to keep up. "We should celebrate. As a family, right? I mean, this is a huge win for all of us." I stopped. Turned. All of us. Raised an eyebrow. "You mean us that laughed at me last night like I was a clown in a pantsuit?" His smile faltered. "Come on, Claire. You know we were just teasing. We always tease." "No, Paul. You belittle. There's a difference." He kept talking, but I wasn't listening anymore. Because behind those words, I saw the panic in his eyes. The real reason he was suddenly being nice. See, Paul had been working at Langston's firm for the past 2 years. He'd weaseled his way into middle management, bragging about being next in line for VP. But Mr. Langston wasn't a fool. He told me privately 2 months ago, Paul's days were numbered. The firm was moving in a new direction, and well, Paul wasn't it. Langston had also hinted that with my new seat, he'd be revisiting the firm's federal contract. The one worth millions. The one Paul managed. And suddenly, the man who once said I'd never be taken seriously was desperate for my approval. I could have crushed him right then. But revenge, if you do it right, isn't loud. It's a whisper, followed by silence. So I smiled. "I'm late for an interview, Paul. But hey, maybe one day you'll work on my campaign. I hear we're hiring interns." He blinked. Swallowed. I got in my car. Rolled down the window. "Tell Dad I'll send him the press kit. Since he said politics wasn't real work, I'd love for him to see what real looks like." And with that, I drove off. Not toward vengeance, but something better. Victory that doesn't ask permission. I wasn't even out of the driveway when Mom's text came through. "Proud of you. Call me." I stared at it like it might bite. Proud? Where was that pride when I came home crying at 17 because my campaign flyers were ripped down? Where was her pride when Dad told the family I was just playing pretend politics while Paul handled real business? No. This wasn't pride. This was proximity to power. I didn't reply. Instead, I turned up the volume on the radio. Local news was already covering my win, calling it a political earthquake. A changing of the guard. I smiled. Then I pulled into my campaign office downtown. My team was buzzing, dozens of text calls, cameras being set up, interviews lined up back to back. But I only cared about one thing that day. The education budget hearing. The one Dad had laughed at me for even proposing. He once said, "You can't fix the system, Claire. Just get a real job." Well, I had one now. And that morning, I walked into the Capitol with a fully drafted bill in my hand, co-sponsored by 3 senators, backed by the union, and funded by cuts to Dad's firm's bloated government contract. When I laid it on the desk in that marble chamber, every lobbyist in the room froze. Because I wasn't just Senator Mitchell. I was the girl who knew where the bodies were buried, who knew how the money flowed, and exactly who had padded their pockets, including the firm Paul worked for, including the contractor my father mentored. You could feel the tension shift in the room. They used to say my name like a punchline. Now they said it like a warning. And I hadn't even started yet. That night, as I left the building, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. Later, I listened. It was Dad. His voice was thin, tight. "Claire, I saw what you did today. We should talk. Maybe we misunderstood each other." Misunderstood? No. He understood perfectly. He just never thought the girl in his shadow would be the one casting it. 3 days later, Dad showed up at my office. No call. No appointment. Just appeared. He looked smaller. Not physically, but like something inside him had been hollowed out. He waited by the receptionist's desk like a stranger. I let him wait. For 26 minutes. Then I walked out, clipboard in hand, pretending I was in a rush. Because I was. But not for him. "Claire," he said, standing too quickly. 5 minutes. That's all I ask. I looked him dead in the eyes. 5 minutes. That's all I gave you 12 years ago. Remember? When I asked if I could take a leadership role at the company and you laughed. Said I should let the men handle the future. He shifted, embarrassed. Things were different then. No, Dad. You were different. I was always like this. You just didn't see it. I could feel my staff watching. But I didn't care. Let them hear. Let them witness. He sighed. Look, I get it. I was wrong. But you're a senator now. That's huge. You don't have to punish us. Punish? Like my life had been some kind of revenge fantasy. Like I hadn't bled and clawed and burned through every ounce of dignity just to survive being his daughter. You don't get to frame this as punishment, I said quietly. You gave Paul the company. You gave him your name, your money, your support. All I had was silence and spite. That was your choice. This, I gestured around, was mine. He nodded, swallowing hard. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folder. Langston's firm is collapsing. Paul, he's on the verge of being let go. There's a contract under review, and we know it's tied to your education bill. If you could just... I didn't even take the folder. I leaned in, smiling faintly. You remember what you said when I asked for help after grad school? When I begged for a job? He looked at me, silent. You said, life isn't fair, Claire. Grow up. I turned to go, but paused. Looks like you're finally growing up, too. And just like that, I walked away. The daughter he tried to silence had become the woman whose silence now spoke louder than his name. The next blow didn't come from me. It came from the ethics committee. Turns out, one of the firms bidding for the state school contracts had ghost subsidiaries tracing back to guess who? Langston Holdings. The same firm Paul now ran. Thanks to Daddy's blessing. My office didn't have to lift a finger. Journalists did the rest. Within 48 hours, the headlines were everywhere. New senator's bill exposes decade-long embezzlement ring. Langston tied to shell accounts through senator's father's former company. And my phone rang nonstop. Not with panic. With congratulations. From senators. From watchdog groups. Even from people I hadn't heard from in years. But not from Paul. Not until the morning the feds raided Langston's offices. That morning, he called me from a blocked number. I answered. I don't know why. Maybe to hear it. To finally hear the fear in his voice. Claire, he said, breathless. You have to make it stop. Make what stop? All of it. The investigation. The press. They're digging into everything. They pulled my emails. My wife is freaking out. My job's on the line. Dad's a mess. He hasn't slept. You proved your point, okay? I let the silence grow. Just long enough to feel the weight of his unraveling. Then I said calmly, I didn't prove my point. You did. By doing exactly what Dad taught you to do. Cut corners, hide secrets, and assume the world would clean up after you. His voice broke. I could go to jail. I didn't flinch. You should have thought about that before you raised your glass to a room full of people and toasted to the real heir of the Mitchell name. I hung up, and for the first time since that cursed dinner, I exhaled. This wasn't about revenge anymore. This was about cleansing. Purging years of silence. Decades of being underestimated. That night, I stood in my apartment overlooking the city. The same city that once ignored me. Now lit up with my name. And I whispered to myself, you didn't just take their seat at the table. You built your own damn table and set it on fire. A week later, I received an invitation. It was handwritten, formal, elegant. Mitchell family emergency dinner. Mandatory attendance. At my father's estate. I laughed. They were still trying to run this like a boardroom. Like I was still their employee. Like they had the power. But something inside me said, go. Not for them. For you. So I did. I wore black. Not because I was mourning, but because I wanted them to. When I walked into that old stone mansion, I expected fireworks. Tears. Rage. Desperation. What I got was worse. Silence. Paul was already seated. He looked like a ghost. Thinner. Pale. Sweating through his collar. My mother tried to smile, lips trembling. And Dad? He stood when I entered. For the first time in my life, he stood for me. Claire, he said, voice low. Thank you for coming. I sat without a word. Let them speak first. Paul cleared his throat. I lost the job. The board let me go. We had to put the house on the market. Dad nodded solemnly. The firm is under full investigation. I've retained a lawyer. I sipped my water. Waited. Mom finally said it. We need help. There it was. The real reason for the invitation. I looked around at the mahogany walls. The dusty portraits of patriarchs past. The gleam of silver that once fed generations who denied me a seat. And I said what they never expected. You remember that summer I begged to go to leadership camp and you said it was a waste on girls? That it was better to focus on finding a husband? Dad winced. Well, I went anyway. I cleaned toilets at a motel to pay for it. And when I got there, I learned something no one in this house ever taught me, how to lead with dignity. They stayed silent. I stood up slowly. Gather my bag. You taught me how to survive. But I taught myself how to win. At the door, I turned. Good luck with the investigation. Tell your lawyer I recommend full transparency. It's the only thing that might save what little you have left. Then I walked out. And for the first time, they didn't follow me. A month passed, then another. I didn't hear from them again. Not a word. But I did see my last name everywhere. Not theirs. Mine. Senator Claire Mitchell pushes historic transparency bill through Senate. From overlooked daughter to political powerhouse, her rise is changing everything. People stop me on the street now. Not for selfies, but to thank me. Veterans, working mothers, young girls with hope in their eyes. One of them, maybe 10 years old, ran up to me outside City Hall one morning. She looked up and said, "My mom said you didn't wait for permission. You just did it." I knelt down and smiled. That's exactly right. And then she asked the one question that shattered me. Are they proud of you now? I paused, looked at her small hands, then at the sky. I don't think it matters anymore. And I meant it. You see, I stopped needing their applause. The day I realized they feared my voice, because it wasn't theirs to control. The family company folded, auctioned off to pay legal fees. The legacy they thought would bury me was gone. But mine? It was just beginning. I bought the old estate a year later, not out of spite, but to build a refuge, a leadership academy, for girls they would have called too much, too smart, too bold, too loud. I named it the Clare House, and on the plaque at the gate, it reads, "Here, no one waits to be chosen. They choose themselves." The dinner table that once felt like a battlefield, I burned it and built around one. Everyone gets a seat. No one's voice is too soft or too sharp, because I learned power isn't inherited. It's reclaimed. And the moment you stop asking for a place, you realize the whole house was yours to begin with.